You need me to, we can move this
I
back.
don't know.
Okay. 22, right?
21.
Good morning.
Good morning. Okay. All right. Um, Yesterday we sort of left off in the middle of a much larger conversation about rabbinic decrees. The question on the table was, according to Rashi, the list of oils and wicks that are not approved for lighting on Shabbos in our Mishnah was because the reason behind uh, our desire for you to not use these wicks and oils is because they're not going to light well, and we're afraid that you're going to tilt the cup and violate the malach of Shabbos of kindling a flame. Our Gemara got into discussion of whether or not you can mix some of the recommended oils with the non-recommended oils. Do the Chachamim establish a rule, a gzera, preventing you from mixing good oil into the oil that is not allowed, so that you won't come to use the bad oil independently on its own? To that, the Gemara said yes. In general, yes. You may not use two materials, one from the approved list, one from the not approved list, because you may come to use solely the oil that is from the not approved list. Then it seemed that we had a another step before that, which was if you have the Gemara gave the example of the melted chalev, the melted fat, which itself should be fine because what's on the not approved list is the not melted chalev, right? The fat that is not melted. The fat that is not melted is a bad fuel. There's a fuel that it won't work well, that won't get absorbed into the wick. Therefore, that's step one. Step two, therefore, don't use the chalev even when it's melted, because you may come to use it even when it's not melted. Step three, can I mix? What was the case? Can I mix oil? Can I mix? Can I mix the good oil into the melted fat, which was anyway only we were told not to use only because then you would come to use the not melted fat. So to that, the Gemara said that would be a gzera l'gzera, a decree not to violate the decree, and that we don't do. Okay. So therefore, according to the Gemara ends that the Gemara concludes that you would be allowed to mix, let's say, olive oil with melted fat and light that on Friday night, because the melted fat itself is really fine. The melted fat, we were only told not to use melted fat so that you don't come to use regular fat. And therefore, since the non-melted fat is really okay on its own, if you remove that one level and mix it with good oil, that would be fine. Your question was, okay, well, let's say even the melted fat, shouldn't that also be treated as a gzera l'gzera? Because the whole reason why you can't use the non-melted fat is because we're afraid that you're going to tilt the cup. So that sounds like a gzera. Telling you not to use, sorry, telling you not to use melted fat itself seems like two steps removed from the actual prohibition. That was that was your question. Meaning the Gemara's the Gemara is reticent to say that you can't mix good oil, let's say olive oil, with melted fat, because you may come to use melted fat on its own, which is a problem because then you may come to use regular fat on its own, which is then a problem because you may come to tilt the cup. That sounds like many steps away from an actual problem. So I had mentioned yesterday that Tosas asked the question, and if you look on the all the way on the right side of your page, so there's like one, two, a bunch of smaller columns, not the Rashi, right? You have the Gemara in the middle, then you have Rashi to the immediate right. Then if you look to the right of that, so you have one little group on the top called Masorah Hashas. Then the one under that is this Tosfot Yeshanim, which is an older version of the discussions of the Balei Tosfot. So there he asked the question in letter number Aleph. He says, I don't get it. Even the melted fat should be, and if you will say, it's still only a decree to prevent you from violating the decree, because mahutach atoshaina mahutach, the melted fat is only problematic because you'll then come to use the non-melted fat, and then the non-melted fat, as we're told not to use, excuse me, because you may come to tilt the cup. So that's a double gzera. Yeshlomar, that was your question. Yeshlomar dechada gzerahi. No, that's only counted as one decree. The efshar shelo yata. Tosfos thinks that when our Gemara says Shema Yata, you may come to tilt the cup, it really means because you will come to tilt the cup. Tosfos thinks it's a near certainty that you will tilt the cup when all the flames in your house are flickering. So, okay, so let's take a step back. So when the Gemara says don't use seaweed as a wick, because it will produce a substandard flame and you're going to start playing around with it in shoves. So I thought that meant that there's this whole class, the whole list, ein madlikin. You can't use these wicks and these oils. They're rabbinically forbidden from using on Shabbos because you may come to violate a Torah level prohibition. According to Tosfos, it's because we're telling you that if you use A, you will come to violate the Torah prohibition. So it's different from you don't eat chicken cooked with milk because then next week you may come to have meat cooked with milk. Here it's that you will violate the Torah prohibition. So that's exactly. So that's not a gzera. That's a rabbinic prohibition telling you we know that when you do A, you will violate a Torah law. So that doesn't count as a chashash, a concern. Right. So it's not building a fence. It is a fence. It's saying don't do A because we know it will lead to B, and you wouldn't figure that out on your own. As opposed to if you do A, we're concerned that may lead to action B.
You think it's a causality. You're gonna do it.
Right. There is the gentleman who was sitting over there yesterday, I don't know his name. He came up to me afterwards and asked if the word siyag, like we have in Pirkei Avot, the Chachamim asu, let's say siyag lachachma shtika. A fence around wisdom is silence, or et cetera, et cetera. There's a list in the Mishnah. Is siyag the same word as geder, which is the same word as gezerah? Where does siyag fit into this? So it's interesting. I was peeking around at this question that Tosfos asked. There are like 4 or 5 different answers, and one of them actually is that it's a little similar. No, not really. To what we were saying. Let's say you have in the beginning of Brachot, you have the first Mishnah in all of Shas. Rabbi Gamliel's sons come home from a wedding, and they haven't said Shema, and it's after midnight. Should they still recite the Shema? And Rabbi Gamliel says yes, because even when the rabbis tell you that you have to finish doing the mitzvah at midnight, what they really mean is, according to the Torah, you have all night, meaning until daybreak, which is 5 in the morning or so, let's say, and because at between midnight and 5 in the morning, your mind's not all there, and we're afraid that you're going to fall asleep and you're going to forget. So make sure to say Shema before midnight. Make sure to eat the carbon Pesach before midnight. Make sure to finish any carbon before midnight, etc. So that's one kind of siyag of let's call it gezerah is a bit of a stretch because we're not prohibiting anything, but we're telling you make sure to recite Shema before midnight because we're pretty sure, right, that if you blow past that and you say, "Don't worry, I'm busy now. I'll daven Ma'ariv. I'll say Shema later," that you're going to forget. Or the Mishnah, or also about the evening Shema. The Gemara says, if you first come home from your day in the field and you change your clothing and you have supper and you say, I'm just going to take a little nap, and then I'll get up and I'll learn and I'll say Mariv and I'll say Shema, then we all know what's going to happen. So don't eat supper. If nighttime has come, first say Shema. So you have that today with all sorts of unless you have like a set schedule of when you're going to daven Arvit, then you should not have supper before saying Shema, things like that, or just set a little alarm on your phone. Remember to say Shema or something like that. If you always go to the shul at 9:30 or whatever it is to daven, then that's part of your daily routine, and then we're not as afraid that you're going to forget, especially now with Sfirat Omer. So that's also an issue. You're going to forget to say Sfirat Omer. Anyway, so that's one kind of protection. Don't eat supper before saying Shema. Right, last night I put a potato in the oven to have with my supper, and I was putting one of my kids to sleep. I fell asleep. I woke up, thankfully, I woke up only 45 minutes later, the house wasn't on fire, but that always is a concern. So that's one level of protection. There, we're not saying don't, eat the chicken and milk because you may come to do something else. It's like what was the example I was going before? Like the way Tosos views the candle. If you use seaweed, you are going to do this. If you eat supper and take a nap before Shema, you are going to forget. So therefore, don't do A. Now, does the Torah say I can't eat supper before saying Shema? No, the rabbi said it. But it's not a gezerah. It's not saying don't eat this other food so that you won't come to eat this food.
It's a really strong recommendation.
Right. I mean, I think we can say that it's, I would use the word a rabbinic prohibition, but it's not a prohibition because you may come to do something else. It's a rabbinic prohibition because we know this will lead, or we can be fairly certain this will lead to a problem. So that might be another distinction where we will say that you can make a gezerah upon another gezerah. The Gemara.
Zera on something that's very likely to happen.
Right. But the Gemara.
It is possible.
Right. The Gemara back on 11 was talking about don't drink water if you are in how does it go? If you're in a private domain and there's a busy street here or whatever, so don't, and you see there's a cup of water over there, you're really thirsty. So I'll lean over, my mouth and the cup of water are both in the same domain. So there should be nothing wrong. I can lift it up. I can lift up the cup, drink the water. Nothing's moving into the private domain. Everything should be fine. The Gemara says don't do that because we're afraid that you're going to lean back and bring the water back into the private domain and violate the malacha of carrying from rishus to rishus. Okay, rule number 1. Rule number 2, the Chacham established an intermediate type of domain called a carmelis. The carmelis is neither the private domain nor the public domain, which is much of what you were learning with Rabbi Friedman in the first chapter. most air like the street outside is most likely a harmless. Maybe uh, maybe Park Avenue is a public domain. It may not have to be Jews though. It could be non-Jews. So there's this, but it's neither is it a private domain. So you have this intermediate kind of domain called the Carmelis. So let's say I'm out here and my body's in the building. There's a cup of water outside. I lean over and I drink. So I'm in the Carmelis. Will we say that I can't drink in the Carmelis lest I move back into the private domain? So that the Gemara says no. That would be a gzeira upon a gzeira. Why? Because why can't I carry in the Carmelis? The Torah doesn't say anything about a Carmelis. The Torah says you can't go from public domain to private domain. The Chachamim are afraid that if you're carrying from your house into the street when you live in some suburban town and the street is not a public domain, then you may also come to carry into the street when the street is a public domain. Okay, so that's a gzeira. Don't carry from your house to the suburban street because you may come to carry from your house onto the highway or whatever, onto the public thoroughfare. Don't do action A because it will lead to action B.
Right.
Yes. Then this other protection of don't lean over and drink in a domain where the majority of your body is not, because you may come to then lean back and carry the item back into the domain which you are situated in. That's gzeira number 2. So that's don't do action A because it may come to action B. Don't do action B because it will come to action C. That's a gzeira upon a gzeira, which the Gemara says the Chachamim do not do. Or in our case, don't mix the oil with the melted fat and light that Friday night, because you may come to light the melted fat independently without the oil, and don't do that because you may come to light non-melted fat without oil as well. That's don't do A because you might do B, don't do B because you might do C. So that's a gzeira upon a gzeira. But our case is don't light with melted fat because you may come to light with unmelted fat, not because I'll do something else, but because that itself will be a substandard flame, which we're afraid you're going to tilt. So it's not a different action. It's not an action with a different item, I should say. It's that we're afraid that you're going to violate something with that cup itself. Sort of like...
Because unqualified oil or fat almost always leads to tilting the candle.
Right. That's what right. I was trying to answer the question without having to say that. That's Tosfos' answer. That because this is a unique kind of protection because it's almost a definite. This other method I was trying to think of is it action A, which might lead to a completely different action, which will lead to an action C. That's called gzeira upon gzeira, as opposed to what we might call a siyag, like don't eat supper before saying Shema. I don't know if that's really a gzeira. That's kind of what you were saying, a protection, where it's gzeira is more like don't eat the chicken and milk because next week you'll eat the meat and milk. Don't carry from your house into the Carmelis because next week you'll carry from your house into the Rosh Hashanah. That's a gzeira. Don't do A because then you might be confused and do B. Here it's don't eat supper because there's a likelihood that you'll come to forget Shema. Don't use substandard oils because you may come to violate Shabbos.
The difference between the siyag and a gedera is to prevent you from doing a negative mitzvah, a sin, versus a siyag, which is, hey, I don't want you to miss saying Shema tonight, which is positive mitzvah. So is there a difference between protection so you don't miss a positive mitzvah versus offense, which is to prevent you from doing a sin? There
might be. There might be. what we're talking about here with the oil would be to prevent you from doing a sin. Yeah.
The siyag might be a softer fence because it deals with helping you to not miss a positive mitzvah, like saying Shema if you fall asleep after you've had dinner.
Right. I don't know that, I mean, you'd have to,
For sin rather than for missing a positive mitzvah.
well, I'm arguing that this is a siyag, that saying that you can't use the substandard oil is itself a siyag because it will then lead to you misusing this very oil.
But siyag might be lighter Gedera, and it might be lighter because it's positive versus negative. It's much, is it, let me say it different. Is it worse to do a sin or to miss a positive mitzvah?
All things being equal. So in general, we have a rule, we have two rules. One is asay docha lo saseh, that if I have a positive mitzvah to do, that would necessarily require me to violate an avera. You're supposed to do the mitzvah, even though it will lead to doing an avera. Now, that's a pretty limited rule. Doesn't always.
You're exempt from doing
No. So let's the Torah's example is
Ohel and Shabbat.
That might be a dispensation. That might be a carve out. That it's not a sin. Just like no, but that's meaning that it wouldn't be docha the lo saseh in that case. The Torah never said the lo saseh in that case. So that would be like, can you call Hatzal on Shabbos? Yeah, because the Shabbos was never said in cases of life and death. So that wouldn't necessarily push it off, be stronger, be more powerful than the violation. It's just that the violation doesn't exist in that case. But let's say the Torah's example is, so when you wear tzitzis, the white strings can be made of any material. The blue strings, the tchelet, has to be made of wool. Tchelet is only wool dyed with the tchelet, whatever it is, dye. So let's say I'm wearing a linen garment that has four corners. Does the Torah require me to put on this woolen string dyed blue, or whatever the color is, in order to fulfill the mitzvah of tzitzis? And the answer is yes, even though by doing so, I am violating the prohibition of wearing wool and linen mixed together, but the mitzvah trumps the avera in this case. The Ramban, in his commentary to the Ten Commandments in Parshas Yisro, says that I'm not sure I understand. He says that mitzvos aseh, positive mitzvos, are motivated by your love of God. Staying away from sin is motivated by your fear of God, and love trumps fear. That's what he says. Now, the Gemara has a lot of rules where you can and cannot say this. This is a discussion at the beginning of Masechet Yevamot. The Gemara has a lot of rules. So, for example, if I was able to do the mitzvah without doing the avera, then clearly the mitzvah cannot trump the avera. Maybe in order to do the mitzvah, which requires me to do the avera has to be done at the exact moment of the performance of the mitzvah. You have all sorts of questions. It's like fun discussion. Let's say Minchas Chinuch asks, let's say there's a woman that I'm not allowed to live with, but not one of the, death penalty ones. One of the low tasses, like don't live with a mamzer, okay? So you don't get killed for living with a mamzer, but it's a prohibition. Lashes, by the mitzvah, peruvu, get married, have kids. She's the mamzer. She's the one who's most suitable, or whatever it is. Huh? Oh, very good, very good. So that's what the Minchas Chinuch says, which is the question: when do you fulfill the mitzvah of having kids? Is it when the kid is born? I'm on the other side of the world. How am I doing that mitzvah? Is it when the man and the woman live together? Because that's the only human component of making a child. So that gets into its own discussion. But you see where asay dochalos asay, the Gemara in Yevamos has a lot of yibum is the reason why this discussion comes up in Masechtas Yevamos is because Yibum by definition is where you have a mitzvah to do an avera, right? A woman, unfortunately, you have this a lot now with the war in Israel. A woman newly married, or not, who never had children. The husband dies. So
he hasn't had children.
yes, and she now has to marry
His brother.
his brother if they so choose. Otherwise, they go through the chalitza process. Any other day of the year, that would be a serious prohibition. That would be kares offense to live with your brother-in-law. Today, it's a mitzvah. So that's how the Gemara gets into the subject of when do we see this rule of, or let's say you have a prohibition, you can't break the bone of the carbon pesach. You have another positive mitzvah to eat all the meat of the carbon pesach. Don't leave over anything. So should I break the bone to get to the marrow inside? You tell me to finish all the meat. You tell me not to break the bone. So does the mitzvah of eating all the meat trump not breaking the bone? So you have all sorts of questions along those lines. Okay. That to answer your question about siyag, about a mitzvah saseh, mitzvah lo saseh. On the other hand, we generally have a rule of when in doubt, do nothing. Shev al taseh adif. If I have a question, I'm not sure. Should I go do this questionable act, or should I stay on the couch, possibly missing out on something I'm supposed to do? When in doubt, the Gemara says, Shev v'al taseh adif. It's better to sit and not do, because it's doing something. Well, let's put it this way. A lav she'ein bo ma'aseh, an avera that does not require any physical action, is considered to be a lesser offense than an avera that does require an action. So, for example, if the Torah says, don't leave over any meat from the carbon, and I sit on the couch and I leave over meat from the carbon. So I violated an avera by doing nothing, by sitting on the couch. Usually, sitting on the couch is a way to avoid doing positive mitzvahs. Here you have an avera that I'm doing by not doing anything. So that's considered a low-grade avera in comparison to an avera where I'm actively tearing your sweater or something like that. So in that way, we consider action a worse offense than an avera of inaction. Anyway, obviously, subject for, I think, like 4 or 5 different discussions here. But getting back to Gzeira and Gzeira, that's what Tosfos says, that Shema Yateh, that we're afraid that you're going to tilt the candle, is not so much that we're afraid you may, it's that we think you will. Okay. So let's get into the next conversation here. So we're at the 2 dots, I would say, 1, 2, 3, 4, 9 lines from the bottom of the page on 21a. Tani Rami Bar Chama taught the following: Psilos ushmanim she'amru chachamim ein madlikim b'Shabbos. The wicks and the oils that the rabbi said you may not light on Shabbos, ein madlikin behen b'mikdash. You can't use them when lighting the menorah or perhaps other lights in the Beis Hamikdash. Why? There's no concern of any malacha when you light candles in the Beis Hamikdash, at least not on Shabbos. Mishum shene'amar, the pasuk says about the menorah in Parshas Tetzaveh, when it says take the oil in order to kindle lights, laha'alos ner tamid, to cause a consistent or constant flame to go up. Okay, what does that got to do with our oils and wicks? Who tanila, who amarla. So he taught this brisa, and then he explained it. What's the problem? How are you violating the pasuk of laha'alos ner tamid, to cause a consistent flame to rise if you're using the substandard oils and wicks? It's not consistent. Kadesha tehei shal heves ola me'eleha. What we mean when we say leha alos ner tamid, for the flame to arise on its own, The flame has to go up on its own. So what does that mean? That means if it's consistently flickering and jumping from one fiber of the seaweed to the next, then it's not the flame that's strong enough to stay consistently lit. It's that it's constantly being relit and relit and relit from different elements of the fiber of the wick, and that would not be the flame that's part of the mitzvah of lighting the menorah. V'lo shetei ole al yidei davar acher, and not that the flame should arise from something else. It should be obviously not self-sufficient, but the flame should at least look like it's self-sufficient, consistently relying on the same wick and not jumping from different parts of the wick to the other. Tanan, the Mishnah says in Sukkah, Sukkah. Mibal'e michnasei kohanim umehemmenehem hayu mafkiin umehen malikin simchas beis hashoeva. They would use, right, so you have this rejoicing all night in the Beis Hamikdash, the Simchas Beis HaShoeva, which culminates with the Kohanim going down to the Shiloach, a body of water. Well, they'll bring up a bucket of water and put it on the Mizbeach, this unique offering of water during the 7 or 8 days of Sukkot. So they were celebrating all night because the pasuk says in Tehillim, "U'she'avtem mayim b'sason." You draw water with joy. Okay, so when you have the mitzvah to draw the water for the carbon of the water during Sukkot, so you have to do that with joy. So there's a party the whole night leading up to the drawing of the water. So the Mishnah in Sukkot describes how you have these giant towers with 4 lamps on each of them. There were 4 towers with 4 lamps, and they would take these giant jugs of oil. Anyway, what serves as the wicks? The worn out clothes of the Kohanim. Now, the worn out clothes of the Kohanim have both wool and linen. Is that the question? The belt. Many of the Kohen Gadol's garments have wool, because anything that was dyed in the garments was made out of wool. So you have the red wool, the purple wool, the blue wool. The Kohen Gadol wore a full robe of blue wool, the me'il. The Kohen hedyot, the standard Kohen, would wear mostly white linen clothing. He wore a long sash, a long belt. Yeah, that had, according to some, that had a string of blue wool of techelet sewn into the belt. Today, my mother is from a family of Kohanim. My uncle is a Kohen who lives in Yerushalayim, and the Machon HaMikdash, the Temple Institute, which has all sorts of vessels ready for the coming of the Beis Hamikdash, and they will make you clothing if you so order. They're not cheap, and they'll make you garments, bigdei kahuna, so that you'll be ready for when Mashiach comes. So my uncle got himself a set of bigdei kahuna. All it's missing in the belt, he's assuming he's not the Kohen Gadol. All he's missing is the string of techelet wool that you have to sew into the avnate, into the sash, into the belt, because that would be prohibited. That's another example of asay docholos asay. The Torah says, put the blue wool into the linen white belt, even though that's a violation of techeles. And there's a large discussion of what did I say? Into the belt of it's a violation of shatnez. I'm sorry. There's a large discussion in the Rambam and the Ravid. How long after the Kohen finishes his service can he keep the belt on? Right, meaning his service is to slaughter the animal, whatever it is. Okay, now you're done. Now you're violating the prohibition of shatnez. You're wearing the belt with the techelet. Or do you say, well, we're not expected to be automatons that like the exact split second you finish the avoda, you're gonna take off the belt. So that's a machlokas. When after you finish the service can you take off the belt? And that gets into a large discussion of the nature of asay docholos asay. Right, but the point of our Gemara is that the Gemara on the bottom of 20b said that the rabbis added wool to the list of substandard wicks, to the list of materials that you may not use for wicks. So if they're using the garments of the Kohanim to make the wicks in the Beis Hamikdash, and our Gemara says that you can't use, that the lights in the Beis Hamikdash also have to adhere to the list in our Mishnah, and you can't use the wicks that we don't allow for Shabbos, because the Torah says Alos Ner Tamid, it has to be an independent, consistent flame. Then how are they using the belt of the Kohen to light the fires of the Simchas Beis HaShoeva if the belt of the Kohen includes wool, includes a material that is not on the list? That's the question of the Gemara. So the Gemara answers, Simchas Beis HaShoeva shiny. The Simchas Beis HaShoeva is unique. Why? Because that's
not a little there to me.
Very good. So Rashi doesn't say that. Rashi says that the pasuk where we saw that which is what convinced us to apply the list which was said about Shabbos to the Beis Hamikdash was only talking about the menorah. The mitzvah is the menorah should be lahalos ner tamid. It doesn't say that any other fire in the Beis Hamikdash vicinity should also be ner tamid. Very good. So you're asking a different question, which is that at the top of 21a, the Gemara said that even on Shabbos, if I want to light in my fireplace, if I want to have a big fire, not one candle, if I want to have a madura, a torch or a bonfire, then I may use the materials that are not recommended on the list. So what do you call the fires? Exactly, because there's sufficient seaweed there to make sure that the fire keeps going. So why don't you say that? Well, yeah. So why don't you say that here when it comes to the Simchas Beis HaShoeva? Yeah. So who asked the question? I saw the question asked by the Marit downstairs here. I think he said that at this point in the Gemara, where we think that lahalot ner tamid applies to all fires in the Beis Hamikdash, then that would be an issue that Shabbat doesn't have. Meaning the reason why you can use the torch on Shabbat, even though you're using wicks and oils from the non-approved list, that's because the issue on Shabbat is because we're afraid you're going to tilt it. In the Beis Hamikdash, that's not the issue. The issue is that it's not shalhavas olam me'eleha. So it could still be violating that problem, even though it's a very big fire. Tashamal, I'll cite a proof. The Tani Rabbi Bar Masna, Rabbi Marsa taught, Big Day Kahuna Shabalu, the Big Day Kahuna that were worn out, Mafkino son Mehen Hayu Osam Silos the Mikdash. I would use them and make wicks for the Beis Mikdash. My love to Kalayim is not talking about both the wool and the linen. Lo de boots. It's only talking about the linen. You know what? That's okay. We're past that time. Tomorrow, I think Rabbi Friedman's landing at like 5 a.m. So he's going to call me. He would like to come from the airport, but he's going to call me. So
Thank you so much. Appreciate
thank you. It'll be a surprise.